Okay, let's unpack this. We are tackling, well, one of the most intellectually difficult questions, right at the heart of the world's largest religion.
Hmm.
We're taking a deep dive into the meaning of the Christian cross, but not through the usual lens of traditional doctrine.
No, we're looking at it through a set of sources that pose some really fundamental um, structural questions, the kind that traditional explanations sometimes, well, sidestep.
And the main source we're focusing on comes from an organization called Path of Light.
That's right. They seem dedicated to searching for, let's say, profound intellectual and spiritual truth.
And what have they done here?
Well, they've basically compiled this list of, frankly, devastating questions. Questions about the core ideas, the cross, salvation, God's power.
They're not just expressing doubt, are they?
No, not at all. It
Yeah.
feels more like they're demanding answers. Answers that make sense, as they put it, to both the heart and the mind.
Right. And for you, listening, whether you're, prepping for a tough conversation or maybe just grappling with these ideas yourself,
Hmm.
understanding this intellectual tension that the source material brings out
Yeah.
is really critical. It shows exactly where the sort of philosophical, theological knots are.
Definitely. And we're going to examine the implications of these questions by looking at three key paradoxes.
Okay, what are they?
First, the tension between divine power and sovereignty. Second, the challenge to justice and fairness and the idea of atonement.
And a third.
And third, the really interesting paradox of symbolism and, well, the veneration of suffering.
Got it. Okay, let's start right at the beginning then. The challenge to omnipotence.
Mm-hmm.
It's a foundational question the source seems to pose to the silent cross itself. If Jesus was truly the Son of God, fully divine,
Yeah.
how could he possibly be killed? And on a cross, no less, by the very people God himself created.
And that immediately throws you up against a core belief in God's absolute sovereignty, doesn't it?
It does.
I mean, if God is all-powerful, knows everything, controls everything, exists outside our human limits, then this central event, the execution of his divine Son.
Well, you have to see it through one of two almost impossible lenses.
Wait, hang on. What are those two lenses?
Okay, so the first lens is God willed it. He actually ordained this specific agonizing event.
Which suggests a kind of predestination.
Exactly. It means the humans involved, Pilate, the soldiers, the priests, they were just sort of carrying out God's necessary plan.
But the problem there, as the source points out,
Right, it removes all human blame, doesn't it? If God planned the cross, then the crucifixion isn't really a tragic result of sin. It's more like a divine puppet show.
that's a huge logical knot right there. If it was preordained by an omnipotent God, why would you even need punishment or salvation to begin with?
Precisely.
Okay, so what's the second lens?
The second lens is that God allowed it,
Yeah.
which suggests that by giving humans free will, God sort of voluntarily limited his own power to step in.
And the source finds that just as difficult. Yes, because it implies that right at the most crucial moment in the whole story, God's sovereignty was apparently, well, suspended. Or maybe even defeated by what mortals did.
So the death of the Son isn't seen as a triumph initially, but almost like a divine defeat.
In that view, yes. Initially.
So the source really forces you, the listener, to grapple with that tightrope walk. Either God is pulling all the strings, or maybe his power isn't quite absolute in practice.
That alone is enough to make most people pause, stop them cold, really.
Yeah.
It is. And this challenge to power, it really sets the stage perfectly for the next section, because the source then pivots, you see. It moves from the nature of the actor God to the effectiveness of the action itself.
Okay, here's where the critique really hits reality, I think.
Go on.
If this huge event, the death of God's Son, was meant specifically to erase sin, to pay some kind of cosmic debt, then the obvious question, the one Path of Light keeps asking is, why is there still so much sin in the world?
That's the problem of efficacy. Plain and simple. If a debt is paid, the account's closed. Finished. If the slate was wiped clean 2,000 years ago, how do we explain? Well, just look around. The ongoing moral failures, the suffering, the clear imperfection of human behavior.
The source sees a massive disconnect there.
A glaring one. Between the big cosmic claim sin debt canceled and the reality of just, everyday life.
And this feeds right into their moral argument, doesn't it? The legal argument almost.
Absolutely. When we talk about justice and fairness, the source is relentless.
They ask that really pointed question. If God is fair, why would his Son take the punishment for what we did?
And that's the absolute core issue with vicarious atonement, isn't it?
It seems so.
It brings up this fundamental question about justice that resonates really across all legal systems everywhere. I mean, think about it. If I steal a car,
Yeah.
society doesn't demand my neighbor goes to prison for me. It doesn't matter how much my neighbor loves me. The standard, universally, morally, legally, is individual accountability.
Yeah.
You did it. You face the consequences.
And the source material really highlights that clash, that dramatic conflict.
It does.
The doctrine demands that an innocent party, the son, has to absorb the penalty for the guilty that's in ourself.
Humanity.
Which, emotionally, you can kind of grasp, right? Love, sacrifice, it resonates on that level.
Sure. But rationally.
Rationally, as the source argues, it makes almost no sense within the framework of justice we apply to literally every other moral situation. So if this ultimate sacrifice is needed to satisfy divine justice, the source then wonders, is this God truly fair, or is he just demanding a transaction based purely on suffering?
And they force the question then of how love and justice fit into that. How do they see them fitting together according to the source? Because that seems like the central paradox.
Well, they argue that within this cross narrative, achieving perfect justice seems to require an unjust action punishing the innocent.
Okay.
And conversely, achieving perfect love and mercy seems to require this terrifying act of violence.
So their intent, the source suggests they are, yes. That this narrative forces a definition of divine justice that's sort of mutually exclusive with our normal human understanding of fairness. Love and justice seem opposed, not in harmony.
And the solution offered by the doctrine involves
A transaction of pain, which Path of Light clearly finds deeply problematic.
Wow, that's quite a synthesis of the argument. It brings the problem down from some high doctrinal level to a very basic human understanding of right and wrong.
Exactly. And this leads us directly to the final paradox they explore. And this one is maybe the most tangible.
Which is?
The paradox of symbolism and suffering.
Ah, the symbol itself, the cross.
Yes. The source asks, why does the cross, the actual instrument of execution, the very means by which God's Son was supposedly defeated, why does that become the most sacred, universally adored symbol?
People wear it on necklaces, hang it in their homes.
Tattoo it on their bodies, even. It's essentially honoring the weapon of death.
Which is unusual, to say the least.
It's a very unique cultural practice. As the critique points out, if a loved one was killed with an axe, we don't make tiny little axe pendants to wear as tokens of remembrance or love.
Good point.
So honoring the execution device itself highlights, maybe, a deep psychological focus on the suffering as the actual currency of salvation.
That idea of currency. Suffering is currency. That's what the source really zooms in on, isn't it?
It is. They challenge the whole philosophical premise. Is salvation truly dependent on blood and pain?
Can real forgiveness actually grow out of suffering?
Does it have to? That's the challenge. If God is merciful, capable of unlimited forgiveness, why must that forgiveness be conditional on a blood sacrifice?
So connecting this to the bigger picture.
The source is essentially asking, does the cross celebrate grace? A gift given freely, no strings attached? Or does it actually celebrate a payment made through excruciating suffering?
And if it's the latter,
then the focus shifts, doesn't it? It shifts from the inherent love of God to the required cost of that love, the price that had to be paid.
And what I found really arresting in the Path of Light material was their account of actually interviewing Christians about these specific points.
Ah, yes, the interviews.
The issues of power, fairness, venerating the painful symbol.
And their findings were quite stark, weren't they?
Very clear. They said when pressed on these philosophical, these logical issues, most people they spoke to simply couldn't give clear, coherent answers. Not answers that satisfied the logical side of the brain anyway.
The intellectual hurdle was just too high for many.
Yeah. And that silence, they reported, it forced them, the questioners, to turn back to the silent symbol itself, still searching for those real answers that make sense to both the heart and the mind.
The goal isn't just blind compliance, it seems, but genuine comprehension, understanding.
So after all that, what does this all mean? We've walked through these three major, really foundational paradoxes that Path of Light forced us to look at.
The limits of divine power versus human action.
The logical knots in divine fairness and vicarious punishment.
And the strange, profound cultural veneration of pain and the symbol of execution?
Right. So the core takeaway.
I think the core takeaway is that the source material really challenges us, challenges you, the listener, to move past maybe inherited understandings, things we've just always accepted,
Yeah.
and to truly engage with the intellectual architecture of this absolutely central doctrine.
Yeah.
These aren't easy questions. Nobody's saying they are.
No.
But they are vital for anyone seeking genuine insight here, real understanding.
Okay. So the final provocative thought, the source material kind of leaves hanging in the air, leaves for you to contemplate, long after this deep dive is over. It's this. When you really look at the story of the cross, when you consider the necessary suffering, the required transaction of pain, does it ultimately feel like an act of absolute love? Or maybe? Does it feel like something else entirely?